Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series for principles of microeconomics or microeconomic principles. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be going over a couple of the potential problems that could appear on test number 1, and particularly a couple of potential problems from chapters 3 and 4. So let's get into this. Starting with the market in equilibrium, graphically illustrate the areas of consumer and producer surplus. So this is what your graph should look like anytime you see a problem that states starting with the market in equilibrium. And in this equilibrium, we have our downward sloping demand curve, our upward sloping supply curve. The law of demand states that there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, hence we have a downward sloping demand curve. And the law of supply says there's a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied, therefore we have an upward sloping supply curve. And the equilibrium occurs where supply and demand intersect one another. That gives us the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. And at this particular price, the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are equal to one another. So anytime you have any type of problem that says starting with the market at equilibrium, this is your template. Make sure that you label the graph correctly. You have an upward sloping supply curve, downward sloping demand curve, and you have the equilibrium where supply and demand intersect one another. The problem asked, to illustrate the areas of consumer and producer surplus. Consumer surplus occurs above the equilibrium price, so it's the area bounded by the equilibrium price and the demand curve. So the triangle in that region right there is the consumer surplus. So you could highlight that particular area right there. Let me change that color. It's a little bit on the bright side. Let me pull this over here so you don't have to see that. Let me do a lighter blue. For your purposes, obviously you're not going to have colored pens or pencils with you. If you just highlight it, for example, put slashes going through it horizontally, and then for the producer surplus, for example, do them vertically, just to make sure you can distinguish between the two areas. Also, make sure you explain that the area of consumer surplus is the area above price but below the demand curve. So that region right there, so that would be part of your explanation. So here we have consumer surplus, the light blue area. No, I did not want to do that. Move that over here and let me change that so you can see it a little bit easier. So that is consumer surplus, the light blue area. Producer surplus is the area bounded by price but above the supply curve. So we could highlight that area down here. So let me put that in and let me change the color so we can distinguish between those two. Putrid green. I don't think that's really called putrid green. I don't know what the name of it is. It's called spindrift. I like to call it putrid green because it looks putrid to me. So the area that's bounded by the equilibrium price and the supply curve, that area right there, the light green, putrid green area, is the producer surplus. So let me label that as the producer surplus. And change the font so it's a little bit easier for everybody to see. So make sure you remember that the producer surplus is the area bounded by the equilibrium price and above the supply curve, while consumer surplus is the area bounded by price but below the demand curve. So our next problem, and actually let me delete this stuff. I did not want to do that. That's much better. I had them both highlighted when I deleted it, not a good thing to do. So the second part of this, starting with the market in equilibrium, graphically illustrate a shortage / surplus. So when I give you a problem, if I give you a problem like this, it says it'll say graphically illustrate a shortage, or it will say a surplus. So I'll go through both of those. So for a market to have a shortage, the price that is occurring in the market has to be below the equilibrium price. So draw a horizontal line in for that price, and you could just call it P. And again, let me change the font of that. So that's the price, And in order to induce a shortage, we are going to have a price below the equilibrium. And to illustrate what the shortage actually is, you follow the price until the first thing you hit is the supply curve. So if you go from that point, those 2 points right there, and you go straight down, that gives you the, excuse me, that was incorrect. That gives you the quantity supplied. So I'll just duplicate this and make it easier, so I'll do this a little quicker. And change that from Q to QE to QS. So there we have, that is the quantity supplied, because we go from the price, we hit the supply curve, we go straight down, and that gives us the quantity supplied. The reason is the supply curve represents the combinations of the prices and the quantity supplied. So if I know the price, when I get to the supply curve, that gives me the quantity supplied. If I want to know quantity demanded, I just follow the price until I hit the demand curve, which is that point right there. So if I go from that point straight down, that will give me quantity demanded. And again, I'm just going to duplicate that and change it to quantity demanded. So that gives us the quantity demanded. So the shortage is the fact that the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. So if we subtract quantity supplied from quantity demanded, that will actually give us our surplus. So you could draw a little arrow in here. We highlight both of those. So there we have the arrows, and you could put in a little bit of text denoting that that's the shortage. Again, let me change the font of that so it's easier for students to see. And let me just change the opacity of that so it doesn't shine through too much or show through too much. So here is the area of shortage. It is QD, subtracting QS, and that gives us the area of the shortage. Alternately, you could be asked to show or graphically illustrate a surplus. So let me move the QD and QS out of the way. And the way we do that, and let me move these, is that we need to have a price that is above the equilibrium price. So here we have a price above the equilibrium price, and we go through the same process. We follow the price until we hit what is the first curve, which is D. So we have, that gives us the quantity demanded right there. So I label that as QD. Again, if I follow the price, after I hit the demand curve, I keep going till I hit the supply curve. That tells me what the quantity supplied is. So I can bring in QS, and now we have a surplus because the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. So the value of the surplus is QS minus QD. So for our purposes, it would be a good idea for you to draw in a couple of arrows here. Let me highlight both of those so I can put endpoints on them, and put in a little text to say surplus, and place that in that region that represents the surplus, which is right here. So with the price above the equilibrium price, we end up with quantity supplied being greater than quantity demanded. If we subtract quantity demanded away from quantity supplied, that gives us the surplus in the marketplace.